Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. So today's card is almost didn't make the cut because it goes horribly wrong a few times, but I thought I'd still share it anyway because of the idea that I had. So I've actually taken my Tim Holtz platform and taken the lid off, which you can do with it, and I've sprayed the back of the first stencil with some Crafter's Companion stick and spray, which is like a temporary adhesive. You could easily just do the same thing, just use a much bigger piece of cardstock and cut it down that way. That would have been easier all in, but I thought this was quite cool to use your platform for something like this, even if the lid doesn't come off. And then I'm going to use some Stampin' Up! Ink to ink each layer. So the stencil has 3 layers on it from Pretty Pink Posh, and so I'm starting with the leaves, and in hindsight I should have, and I now know what I should have done with the flowers, is I should have actually done them first and heat embossed them in a clear ink or something, a clear embossing powder, so that they would almost look like they were sitting on top of the leaves or in front of the leaves, rather than the way they're going to look, which is where this started to go wrong. So anyway, so I got the ink on there and I'm going on there really lightly with just a brush, like a blending brush. It's actually a makeup brush. So and then taking a paper towel just to take off the excess ink off of the stencil. It's not clean and I will clean it later, but it just gets the excess off so I'm not completely covered in ink. And that gives you your first layer. So obviously by the title, this is not, that does not look like a Christmassy leaf. But I thought that the flowers on here looked very much like a poinsettia shape. So I'm going to use some red, 2 shades of red, although I change up the second one. So the first shade of red is for the poinsettias, or what I see as poinsettias. And so this is the second layer that goes on to the, onto the piece of cardstock. It's the first time I've had this kind of layering stencil, so it's very cool. I really like it. But what I should have done is done the flowers first, heat embossed them, and then done the leaves, so the leaves look like they're behind it. But hindsight and all that. So what I did was I tried to use a slightly darker red around the edge of the the poinsettias. It didn't work, so I just took it off, scrapped that. And then I put the third layer on, which has got the sort of centers of the flowers and some like berries, which again is what made me think that this looked a bit like a Christmassy, or could be a Christmassy sort of background-ish. So obviously it's not meant as a Christmas themed layering stencil, but it's, I don't know, I just saw that when I saw it, so I went with it. But you could use this all year round, really. You could use it for like summer and spring cards. That would look really lovely. So now I've done the like berries that are in the background, which again is what made me think Christmas, thinking holly berries, poinsettias, that kind of thing. And the reds, although they are 2 different darknesses, they look too similar in the background. I sort of lifted it a little bit to see what was going on. So in the end, and because of the style that I was trying to go for here, I then brought in some Distress black soot and went over the top of them. Weird, I know, but like I say, this nearly didn't make it onto anywhere, because it just, I don't know, I had issues with this card. So I got the black soot over the top, so it's kind of got like a red-black look for these berries. It kind of works out in the end, sort of. And then I will obviously clean up the stencil. So now that's basically the background done. But I didn't like, and you can see it on there, I didn't like the A, the white background, and B, the red flowers where the leaves were showing through it, because the ink is translucent. So for the background, I just took some Pool Party ink, which is just a pale blue ink, and I thought it would work well with the sort of slightly vintage thing I'm going to try and do. I just went over the whole background and it just muted the whole thing down. It wasn't so stark white, and I really loved it. I'll also use some vintage photo later on around the edges, but obviously this is not the size of the card, so I needed to trim that down first. And while I was trimming this down, this is where I sort of realized that I didn't like the red. It just wasn't working. You're going to have moments like that with your whatever project you're working on, where you're just going to have things that just work really well, and some things you just think, no, I've got to start again. And I nearly did with this one. I nearly completely started again, but I didn't. I kept going with it because I don't want to waste it as well. So yeah, so I went around the edges with some vintage photo distress ink to give that sort of more vintage vibe, or what I would call like a vintagey sort of thing. And just going around the edges there, and then still trying to work out in my head what I was going to do with this, because like I say, I didn't really like it. So that's basically what you would have if you carried on. So what I first was thinking was that I would use some of this Nuvo red Hort, I think that's how you say it, Horte, this red glacier paste over the top, and that would have looked really, really good. And I went back and forth a couple of times, as you can see. It's kind of got a foiled effect, so I decided that wasn't really the look I was going for on this card. So in the end, I took some texture paste, and just because you can line up the stencils as you go and reline them up, I just lined it up again and put some paste over the top, just like that. Super simple. I knew I was just not happy with the fact that they looked like they were translucent, so you could see the leaves through them, so I had to do something. So this way it covers that. They look like they're sitting on top of the leaves, and this is extra texture and stuff. The weird thing, and you'll see this in a minute, is that when it dried, the ink that was underneath it seeped through and up through the texture paste. So if this was a more springtime kind of card, I would have left it, because it gave them kind of a pinky look, if you can see there. But it wasn't red enough for like poinsettias for me. So I grabbed some Cosmic Shimmer Pixie dust. Pixie dust, I think. Everything's listed below. And a bit of water. And I just used that because of the vibrancy of the red. I was hoping it would be enough that I'd be happy with it. Also, it's Cosmic Shimmer, so it's got tons of shimmer in it. On the texture paste, though, it doesn't shimmer as much as if it's on like a plain background, because it's absorbing into the texture itself. So just be aware that when you try things like this, they're not going to necessarily be the actual effect you're expecting. So expect the unexpected, which is what happened here. I was kind of expecting more shimmer than it actually gave off, but it made sense because it was going into a texture paste, which has obviously got texture, and absorbing into that. And then there is some shimmer, but it's not in your face shimmer. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's not right, obviously shimmery, but there is a slight shimmer there, which is quite nice. So I just painted on, really easy. Just added some water to the powder, and then using that to paint them, basically. Very easy to do. And like I say, you can use this is obviously not meant as a Christmas thing. And you can obviously use this for other things. So summertime, this would make a great Hawaiian sort of themed, like tropical kind of thing. I don't know why I said Hawaiian, because there's lots of tropicals out there, but a sort of tropical themed birthday party or something like that, or birthday card. That'd be kind of cool. But I just saw poinsettias, so I just kind of winged it. So maybe I just got an odd mind. That's probably it. So just finishing the last one off here, and funny enough, I had just enough of it, so that was quite cool. I did miss one with the texture paste, so I just added a bit of shimmer onto it just because I could. I probably didn't need to do that either. And then just cleaning the brush off. And the little triangle tray is just a bead tray. For pretty much nothing, I bought really inexpensive off Amazon. Got, I think it's like 24 of them. So I just made one of them one of my little trays for the desk for things like this. So just a handy little thing. So I'm going to let that dry, and then I'm going to take, this is where problem number 2 comes in. I'm going to take the Tim Holtz Mini Holidays Set 3, and I've got a Stamp-A-Ma-Jig. I've done other videos showing and explaining how to use the Stamp-A-Ma-Jig, but you basically take the plastic square, pop the corner, top left corner into the handle, the green bit, and then stamp down your image onto it, as I did there. Then when you want to line it up on your project, you line up, you've like got a template, I guess, of that image, and then you line up the corner of the handle with the corner of the plastic sheet, take that out, hold the handle in place, and then stamp down. Now I shouldn't have moved my handle because I didn't stamp it very well, so you know, I tried to line it up, did not work. Made more of a mess. So I, instead of just getting another piece of cardstock, I then decided, you know what, I'm just going to stamp it, and it's going to be what it's going to be. So it was a little squonk, but it was fine. Then I'm just going to clean off, as long as you don't use a permanent ink, you'll be fine. It can clean off the plastic quite nicely. Or, you know, your like template piece, and you'll be fine. So in the end, I didn't use it, but you know, it's a good thing to have for things like rubber stamps where you can't see through it if that bothers you. It's a handy tool. I've had it for years. I think you can still get them, and not sure where, but I'm sure you can get them still. So trying to decide where to put my really squonk sentiment on this bizarre card. So try to, you know, cut it at an angle. I didn't think that worked very well, so I tried to get a different angle, and you know, on the sentiment. This is the other thing, when you've got sentiments, you can play around with things like this. I, you know, then dragged out a corner chomper from We Are Memory Keepers and chomped the corners, or a couple of the corners, then rounded a couple more. It just wasn't working. I could not get this card to work. Everything that I was trying with it just would not work the way I thought it was going to. So it happens. But in the end, just cutting the sentiment straight is what I eventually land up doing. So I just trimmed everything off. It's fairly close to the sentiment now. There's not sort of a decent gap or anything, but it works. So I just kind of rolled with it. And I'm also going to take the vintage photo and go around the edges of everything so it ties in with the main piece, including the card base, which is what I'm working on now. The card base and all the sort of craft color cardstock is Neenah Desert Storm cardstock. It's really nice. It's not super heavy, but it's nice. It's a nice craft card, if that makes sense. And then I'm going to drag out some old school twine. This is a Stampin' Up brand, but any sort of twine would work really well. I think it's a nice natural fibre that works really nicely with things like vintagey sort of things. I don't know why, but it just works. So, or if you want that sort of more natural looking fibre on your card, it works super nicely. So I just wrapped it around a few times. That's an old school trick. Just wrapped it around a few times, I think about 6 times or something. And then that way I've just got this sort of extra something in the background. With all things like this, I'm realizing that layers are key. So whether your layers are in layers of stamped images, whether they're in textures or, you know, things like ribbons and laces and things like that, it all adds to that interest in the background. So I got that stuck on. That also gave me a place to put my sentiment, because I now had somewhere that made sense for the sentiment. At that point, still didn't know where it was going to go, but as soon as I put that card base on and the twine, I realised that was where it had to go. It just made sense there. So I've got some foam on the back. Didn't need to use foam, I don't think, because the height of the, although very subtle, the height of the twine would have probably been enough, but I added it in and it works fine. To get it to stick nicely, because there is twine there, I've added some wet adhesive to the back of it. I think this is just Anita's tacky glue. I think that's the one I've got at the moment. Works really well, actually. And then I'm going to use some crystal glaze over the top of the berries, I guess. And again, this is another, just a sideline. Like I say, this card wasn't going very well. But I should have done things like this before I even put the twine on and let all of it dry. So when I've done the texture paste, I could have done the berries at the same time. So I'm not trying to go underneath my sentiment to get the glaze in there, because obviously it's not going to be as straightforward as just putting the blob on there. So, and then you could leave it like this. But for me, I was thinking poinsettias, and so for me, I needed the centers, which of course I didn't use in the end because of the texture paste. So I grabbed some copper Nuvo crystal drops, and believe it or not, there are 3 drops per center. And I think it must have just been too hot here, and it was just, they went to liquid and they just became 1. So that's how they turned out. So like I say, this is probably not my best piece of work, but it kind of works. And I think for a non-traditional Christmas card, it's okay. So I hope you've enjoyed this, guys, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.